forward.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. So hello everyone, I'm Darice. As you might have guessed from the title, I went to Zagreb, Croatia. I went in 2014, 2015, so kind of feels like it was just yesterday, also kind of feels like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it feels like both at the same time. This photo on the front here is of the Zagreb Cathedral in the old part of Zagreb, which when I first started Googling Croatia, I thought that I was going to be living right in the center of the old town. And you'll see in later photos that is not at all what my neighborhood looked like. But I love Croatia. I loved my exchange experience. And when I was coming up with this presentation, I was also working on it while I was at Nyan with North Star, and we had a lot of conversations about youth exchange. And I went to sessions about like mental health with youth exchange students. I went to some Rotex presentations, went to some presentations about the rebound experience. And one of the things that I wanted to really put into this presentation is to make it very genuine. And I feel like for me, that's talking about the highlights of my exchange, but also talking about some of the difficult points of my exchange and also of returning. So I don't necessarily want this presentation to be just like, here's a highlight reel of all the really, really cool things I did. I did a lot of really cool things, and I'm very, I love the experience and I would do it again a million times over. But I also want it to be kind of genuine. So we can go to the next slide. So I was in Zagreb, which is the capital of Croatia. I included two little maps here. So if you're not super familiar with the geography of Europe, on the bottom right, I've highlighted like where Croatia is. So it's next to the boot of Italy. Usually when I tell people I went to Croatia, they're like, I have never heard of that place. So I usually just explain it in proximity to Italy, and they usually will get it. And then within Croatia, Zagreb is kind of in like the northern part of the country, a little bit inland, so not on the coast like I was expecting when I first Googled Croatia, but I still loved it nonetheless. You can go to the next slide. So these are some pictures of the old town in Zagreb. Right behind the city is, they call it a mountain. If you're from an area that has mountains, you're like, that's a hill, that's not a mountain. But it's a mountain called Medvenica. And so the two pictures that I have are the main part of the city, and I included them because I spent so much time just walking through the old part of Zagreb. I loved it. I would go to cafes with my friends, we'd go to restaurants. There's a ton of super cool museums, churches, just so many things to see that you couldn't even get through all of it in a year. And then the other little like graphic that I added in there is called a licitar, and it is a little heart shaped, usually a cookie. It's kind of like a gingerbread style of cookie, but like a little bit lighter and a little bit sweeter. That's kind of a symbol of Zagreb specifically, but also just kind of Croatia in general. Um, and one of the things that I really love about them is they're kind of just everywhere in Zagreb, and they're just used as a symbol for everything. But during the Christmas season, they make them into like little Christmas ornaments. So I have a couple that I brought back with me when I was on exchange. But for those of you that are familiar with the like culture shock wave, where you're kind of doing really, really well, and then you kind of hit a low point on your exchange, it's usually around the holidays or like November-ish. And so for me, I kind of hit it around like Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so one of the things that brought me a lot of joy was celebrating Christmas. I personally love the Christmas season. I hate winter. I don't know why. I still live in Minnesota, but I really enjoy the Christmas season. And so in like decorating for Christmas with my host family, we got to make the little litzicata cookies. And then we got to make like little Christmas ornaments. And so I still have a bunch of them. And it just brings like very fond memories of going to Christmas markets and putting the Christmas tree up with my host family, which in Croatia, they don't put it up until like 2 days before Christmas, which to me was like wild because I'm one of those, I'm decorating as soon as Thanksgiving is over. But that's some of the really fond memories that I have. And I had two host families while I was there. The first one I had up until New Year's, so I was there for about 4-ish months. And then the second host family I was with from New Year's until July, the beginning of July when I left. So I was with them for about a little under 7 months. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So a lot of people, when they think of Croatia, they think of the beach, they think of the Adriatic coast. When I Googled Croatia, I thought that I was going to be living right on the beach. I sure wasn't, but I did get to go with my host family. It was amazing. We went to this town called Baška on the island of Krk, and it was a really amazing, beautiful thing to see. This picture is of a sand beach, but most of the beaches in Croatia are rock beaches or like little pebbles. So the water is super crystal clear because there's not a lot of like sand floating around in it. But one of the funny things that when people ask me about Croatia, they're always kind of like, how did you end up in Croatia of all places? And the funny thing is that I actually never intended on going to Croatia. I really wanted to go to either South America or Spain because I learned Spanish in school, like most people in the States. And when I was applying to Rotary, I gave them like my list of 5 places I wanted to go. It was like all South America plus Spain. And when I got accepted to the program, they were like, you're accepted, except we can't send you to any of the countries you chose. So we're going to give you some alternatives. And they were like Scandinavia and Croatia. And I was like, okay, amazing. Scandinavia sounds really, really cold. So I'm gonna go to Croatia. And that is actually how I chose Croatia, was because it seemed warm and sunny and I like the beaches. And I really believe it was like the perfect choice for me. I kind of think of it as like everything that needed to happen is what happened. But yeah, that's how I ended up in Croatia. We can go to the next slide. So this is the school that I went to. That is the actual building. It's a very brand new building, or at least it was at the time. They were still building it while I was there. We actually didn't have furniture the entire first week of classes because they were quite literally still building the school, but we got through it. We eventually got furniture and the plumbing and the wiring was all figured out. But I went to a language school, which in Croatia, it's a little bit different than how they do it here in the States, where the high school that you go to is not based on the actual area that you live. Like it's not, a specific neighborhood. You go to one school. If you live in this neighborhood, you go to the other. It's each school has like a focus. And so there's like a medical science school, there's performing arts school, there's a regular science school, language schools, etc. And so you go to a school based on the interest. So I went to a language school, and each class in the language school, you follow a specific track. So you can either be in like an Italian, French, or English track. I was in the English track, which meant that in theory, my classes were like in both Croatian and English, although what mostly happened was they were just completely in Croatian because not all of my teachers wanted to teach in English, but in theory, they would have been in a mix of English and Croatian. But because it was a language school, I also had to study 4 other languages. So I had English and Croatian, and then I also had to go to Italian, Russian, German, and Spanish. I had some background in Spanish, but I had no background in Italian, Russian, or German. So that was interesting. Trying to learn 6 languages at once is a lot. But it was really cool. I loved my school. The nice thing about schools in Croatia is that you're with the same like class all day, every day. So you have the same like cohort that you start like first year of high school with, and then every single day you all just go to the same class. So I was with the same people all day, every day. And I had a classmate who actually moved from Canada to Croatia the summer that I started my exchange. And she was Croatian, her family was Croatian, but she had grown up in Canada. So she was kind of my guide for the first couple of weeks of being like the basic Croatian to English translator when I needed it sometimes, but also just kind of telling me some of the differences between like Canadian and American culture and Croatian culture. So that was really cool. You might be wondering why there's a picture of bread on my slide. And that is because the neighborhood that my school was in, I think this is like a cute little fun fact. The neighborhood that my school was in is called Kajzerica, which is also what they call a Kaiser roll. And I didn't put the dots together until I was there for about 2 months, but my neighborhood, the English translation of the name of my neighborhood is literally just Kaiserroll. So that was like what my neighborhood was called, which I just think is funny. I don't know how the name happened. It's a fairly new neighborhood, but I lived in Kaiserroll. You can go to the next slide. So, as I mentioned, I did not live in the super cute Mediterranean architecture of the old part of Zagreb with like the cute tile roofs and like the churches. I lived in the new part of Zagreb in Novi Zagreb, which is new in the sense that it was built in like the last 100 years. But Novi Zagreb is like the southern half of the city, and it all is like socialist era brutalist architecture. So just like giant concrete blocks. And I will say on like a rainy day when it's really foggy, it's not the most like visually appealing sight. It's very gray, but I kind of grew to love it a little bit. Like now when I see it, I'm like, oh, it's like a little nostalgic, a little piece of home. Because, you know, one wouldn't necessarily like fall in love with huge concrete block apartment buildings, but I'm like, that is where I spent 10 months of my life. So all of the neighborhoods all just kind of look the same. They're all just like big buildings of apartments, and every single building looks exactly the same. But I really loved it. And Zagreb as a whole is very like pedestrian friendly. There's a lot of public transportation, so it was really easy to get around. And so I spent a lot of time just like walking, taking the tram places. So that was really cool. I was able to kind of explore different areas of the city that I lived in. We can go to the next slide. So I have a lot of photos from my exchange. I could just include all of them and just put you guys through a whole slideshow of every photo I wanted to show you, and I'm not going to do that. But some of the highlights of my exchange year were going on trips. And so I went on some trips with my host family, with my Rotary district, and also I went on a trip with my school as well. So with my host family, I had the opportunity to visit Croatia and Austria and Hungary, which was really, really cool. And then with my Rotary district, we did a lot of trips just like around Croatia as well. And then we also did Euro Tour, which was like our big circle tour around Europe, which was a phenomenal experience. I loved Euro Tour so much. And then we ended our Euro Tour at our district conference, which was on an island on the Croatian coast, which was perfect. So the photos that I included, the one on the top left is my neighborhood. That was my view out my bedroom window during like September or October. The fall colors were insane. They were so beautiful. The top right is another photo from the coast. I have so many photos of the coast because it's so beautiful. And then the bottom photo was from one of the Rotary trips that we did. We went to the Croatian national like television and radio station, which is kind of like the equivalent of like BBC and BBC Radio. And we got to go onto the set of their like morning talk show, which was kind of like Good Morning America, but in Croatia. We also got to go to the set of like The Voice and a couple of other things, which were really, really cool. And we did that with all of the other exchange students in my city. You can go to the next slide. So these are just some photos of some of the friends that I made on exchange. I still talk to a good number of them, even though I've been back on exchange for like 7-ish years I've been back. So the photo on the left is all of us after our language class. So all of us that were in Zagreb, we had a language class that we went to once or twice a week, and then we would all hang out in the city center afterwards. Croatia and like Zagreb is one of those cities where everyone is just out late all the time. So even when we got out of language class at like 9, there were still people out and about doing things, which was really nice. And so we had lots of late nights after going to our language classes. And then the photo on the right was when we visited Dubrovnik, which was one of our Rotary trips. Dubrovnik is like an old walled city in the southern part of Croatia. And it also is where they filmed part of Game of Thrones, fun fact. But it's one of like the main tourist spots. So a lot of people I know who went to Croatia, they're like, yeah, I went to Dubrovnik. And I'm like, I probably could have guessed that. But yeah, it was amazing. We can go to the next slide. These are just some photos from other trips that we went on. We did a lot of train rides, which was really cool because the train system in Europe is far superior to the train system that's kind of non-existent in the US. So we did lots of train travel, especially to Austria, because that was just the easiest way to get there. And then I went on a school trip to a town called Vukovar, which is on the border of Croatia and Serbia. It was a really key city in the Croatian War of Independence in the 90s. And the photo that I included of the water tower is still standing in the town of Vukovar. It's been standing for 30 some years, and it was shelled and shot at by Serb forces when they took control of the city, and the city was under siege for quite a while under Serb control. And now the water tower that's still standing, still looks exactly like that photo, is now kind of just like a symbol of Croatian independence and perseverance and like the fight for their independence from Yugoslavia. And then the bottom photo is just another photo from Vukovar as well. We can go to the next slide. Some more photos of things that I did. I told you I could do so many slides of things that I did when I was in Croatia, but there's a photo of a handball game. I did not know handball was a sport before I went to Croatia. And then my host family said, we're going to a handball game. And I thought they meant basketball. And then I showed up and it was not basketball, but it was a really good time. And then the bottom right photo was a photo from when we went to the set of The Voice Croatia, which was really cool. We got to sit in the judges' chairs, pretend to be the judges. It was really cool. And then the bottom left was one of the many, many castles that we got to visit as part of a Rotary trip. We can go to the next slide. So, like I said at the beginning, I love to talk about my exchange and all of the amazing things, but it also has proven to be some of the most difficult parts of my life. And so whenever I talk with like fellow Rotex or I talk about like my rebound experience, I do talk about like reverse culture shock and how difficult the rebound experience can be. For me, I had a really interesting experience. So I went to an international high school in St. Paul, which meant that 95% of my classmates were all exchange students, which I thought would make it easier coming back from exchange because I was like, oh, they're all exchange students. They're all going to get it. I love Rotex. And so I thought that like my school would be very similar, and it was not. It actually made it incredibly difficult because all of my peers were all on their exchange and I was returning from my exchange, so we were having very different experiences. But also my experience of going to Croatia was not interesting to them at all because they were also all exchange students. And so I would like talk about my exchange and they were like, okay, cool, like we're also doing that. Or they had like been to Croatia, so it wasn't kind of like this new experience to them. It was like, oh yeah, I went there for like summer vacation like last year. So that was interesting. And also, I mean, there was just like a lack of Croatian community and resources in the area. There's not a huge Croatian community, at least in Minneapolis or in the Twin Cities. So that was really difficult. It was hard for me to kind of stay connected to the Croatian community since coming back. But Rotex and my involvement with like my fellow former foreign exchange students has been essential and really the only reason I'm involved in Rotary today. I had a really, really difficult rebound year. My year back after Croatia was incredibly difficult, and Rotex and being involved with Rotary quite literally like saved my life. I feel like I said this so many times when I was at NIAN, so some of you might be like, girl, we've heard this already. But I love Rotex. I love being involved with Rotary, and without the involvement of Rotex and without the support of the other people who went on exchange around the same time as me, I would not be involved with Rotary at all. So that was a really key part of my exchange. And I'm so grateful to Rotary and also Rotex for just like being the support network that I really needed. You can go to the next slide. So post exchange, what I've been doing is I had 1 year back in high school, graduated high school, moved to Florida for school, and I wasn't super involved with Rotary at that point. They don't really have a strong Rotex program in Northeast Florida, really at all. They don't have a Rotex program, so I tried to get involved, but it was a little bit difficult. So I kind of took a break from Rotary stuff. Got a degree in criminology with minors in psychology and international studies. I feel like I would not be a Rotex if I didn't at some point study international something in school. And now I currently work at the University of Minnesota. I work in student services. I also have a million other things that I do. I'm been pretty involved with Rotary and with Rotex. I also write in my free time. I wrote a book about a year and a half ago that came out, so that was been pretty cool that I've done since COVID. But yeah, my involvement with Rotary has been very impactful and very meaningful to me personally. We can go to the next slide. So currently, I'm on the Rotex exec board for North Star, and I'm also a country officer. These are some photos from Nyan, the conference we went to. It was an amazing experience. I'm very much looking forward to the next time I get to go to a conference with North Star, because I'm going to make sure it happens at some point, Jackie and Eric. But I really love Rotex, and I really enjoyed being a country officer. And so I really just want to give back what this program has given to me. So I think that's my last slide. There might be one more after. Yes, questions. Does anyone have any questions, comments?
Darice, thank you so much. And yes, wow. I invite everyone to take questions. We have about 8 more minutes. So,
Darice, what in your school, in your language school in Zagreb, how many of those students were on an exchange from other countries?
Just 2 of us that I'm aware of. There was another Rotary student at my school. She was from Michigan, and they intentionally put us in different classes, so we never had a class together. But I just knew her through Rotary stuff. But as far as I know, there weren't any other exchange students. There might have been 1 or 2 from another program, but it wasn't a huge number at all.
One quick follow-up question. You pronounced a city, do you put the emphasis on the second syllable? No, on the first syllable. Dubrovnik, or say, is that Dubrovnik is what we typically heard here?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so I've been mispronouncing it for 40 years. Okay.
That's okay. There's very the Croatian accent, or the Croatian way of saying cities, is a little bit more difficult for native English speakers, especially with the rolled R's. But yeah, a lot of Americans say Dubrovnik.
Yeah. Okay.
And how would you say it?
Dubrovnik.
Dubrovnik. And how about Zagreb?
Zagreb. Just
Zagreb.
It's pretty similar to how we say it, just rolled R.
Zagreb. Zagreb.
Darice knows this, but when I was in college, way back before the dinosaurs, back in 1980, I studied for a semester in Zagreb through Gustavus, and I lived more in the center of Zagreb. But and there's some wonderful, there used to be anyway, some wonderful art museums, very small ones, but. A question for you: did you get into the naive art that is prevalent in the Balkans?
I did a little bit. I did not know nearly as much about art as I have since then, because I was 15 when I was on exchange. So I was like, this is boring. But we did go to some art museums. There was actually a really cool museum. It's not completely art, but it's called the Museum of Broken Relationships. And it's exactly as it sounds. It's people who have art and artifacts from relationships in their lives that have ended. And it's a museum full of that. So there's a lot of art in there. But we did go to a lot of art museums and a lot of the other museums. But I feel like at some point it just kind of all blurred together because there were so many museums.
You had mentioned learning 6 languages all at one time and how it's not normal. Tell us about that. What was their approach? Did it work? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So it seemed to work pretty well. I feel like in Europe, they tend to just learn more languages right off the bat anyway. So my classmates were all pretty fluent in English. So their English class wasn't really about like learning the basics of English. It was more just about practicing English. But then the other like the 4 languages that we had to take in addition to Croatian and English, I would say most of them were all like pretty conversational, but not necessarily like fluent. But it was interesting. All of the classes were kind of like immersion style. So when we went into our Italian class, it was completely in Italian. We went into our Russian class, it was completely in Russian. So I think the immersion style tend to work a little bit better, but I think for me, like having to learn that many languages at once was kind of a lot, given that my day was already in a foreign language for me. Like Croatian was still something I was learning as I was there. I had no knowledge of Croatian really before I went, aside from Pimsleur. But yeah, I don't know how they did it. They seemed to do it. And I was like, at some point, I think they might just have a brain that's wired differently than mine. I don't know.
If I could get a quick question in, you mentioned you had a book that you wrote, and did I miss the title or what that was about? Maybe I missed that.
Yeah, I did not mention anything about it, but I write poetry in my free time. And so I wrote a book called Making It Up As I Go, which is just kind of a collection of poetry from the last couple of years. It's one of my little side quests in my life.
And where do we get this book? Where do we find it?
I have it on my website, which is just daricefowler.com. I intentionally have not put it on like big retail sites because I don't want it on Amazon personally. But I do have it on my website.
Does that mean that you may think Jeff has enough money, maybe? Jeff Bezos? Commentary on Amazon or just on, yeah, Jerry's shaking her head, yes.
Yeah, it's more just my own thoughts about Amazon. They also, I mean, not that like writing has any sort of money making potential unless you're like rich and famous already, but I don't love the way that the Amazon world works.
Sorry, I shouldn't have
That's
said
just
that.
a personal preference.
Could you put the link to your website in the chat, please? Because we all seem to love to read things, especially if there are people. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question too, Darice. I'm so curious now after so many years, and you seem to be so self-aware of that. Do you think this, well, I think your title said how it changed your life, but how did it change your life? How did Darice change through this experience?
Yeah, I think that I think there's been a lot of things. I think that some of the more classic examples, like it taught me to, understand the world better. It taught me to problem solve. It taught me to be more open-minded. I feel like all of those apply. But I think also one of my big passions is like mental health and international education, and also like supporting our current students. A lot of what I do is kind of draw on my own experiences. And because I had a really difficult rebound year, and I had a difficult exchange year in a lot of ways, I feel like I learned a lot from those experiences, and now I kind of use that to fuel some of my other passions. And so I think a lot of the things that I experienced after exchange, I really just kind of use them as fuel to really just like find what I wanted in life. And so I got my psych degree because I was really passionate about mental health. I decided to keep working in student services and working in education because I really love students. And a lot of that is because I love working with Rotary, and I love working with like Rotary students in particular. And so a lot of that has just kind of like led me towards my passions in life, and also has kind of made me a little bit self-aware. I think that I have spent a lot of time just kind of understanding the impacts that my exchange experience has had on my life and how it kind of impacts my thoughts and beliefs and emotions now. And so I think all of that has just kind of like steered me in a direction that I never would have considered without Rotary.
Wow. Well, that is just amazing. Congratulations.
Darice, what pushed you to a international high school?
I just thought it would be a really cool opportunity. I didn't want to go to my local high school. I wanted to do something a little bit different. And so I was looking around at what options I might have in St. Paul. I'd considered an art school as well, but when I heard about the international high school that I went to, it's called St. Paul Preparatory School. When I heard about that, I knew it was something that I really wanted to do. I've always been really passionate about traveling and international education, and so I just thought it'd be a really cool experience and something that was like a little bit different. And then they also offered to let me start early, so I actually ended up skipping a grade, which was not intended, but they were like, we actually want you right now. So that was also a contributing factor, but I just really wanted like an international education, and I thought that it would be so cool to have my classmates be exchange students all day every day for 4 years.
It's an interesting thought. I can understand it very well. But our time has come to an end for today. But I'd love to invite you to join at any of our other meetings. And it's just an easy, we always use the same link. And maybe we can get to know you better if you so prefer. No pressure, but this was just really a delight. Let me share my screen here. And usually we end, or I end, with a quote, and we've seen this before a few weeks ago, because I used it also when Eric Johnsford was presenting, because it's such a strong quote, isn't it? My dream is for every 17-year-old or 15 to become a youth exchange student. If we could achieve this, there would be no more wars. And that was by Karl Wilhelm Steinhammer. And he was the president of Rotary International in 2004 and 2005. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.